2, 1. Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I'm the Director of Programs for NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness of North Carolina. I'll be your host for the evening. I'm glad you're here. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building conversations and really building community on the topic of mental health. Tonight's guest is a powerhouse, Carlita Victoria. When she moved to New York City after college, she went there to work in the theater and she actually got a job like immediately. She began performing. Who does that? But as we know, even though she was doing well, mental health challenges can sneak into our lives no matter the time, the place, or the person. As she climbed towards her goals, she felt that something was going wrong. Depression was invading her mental space. In fact, she found herself wanting to die. In just a few minutes, we'll learn how Carlita pushed herself through that, brought herself to a point of wanting to survive, even wanting to thrive. And then now, today, how is she helping others? She's doing a lot. As usual, the first part of our show will be a conversation with our guest. Then we'll watch a brief video of the week. And finally, we'll take questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience, and our Facebook friends. So please keep the questions coming. And one final step before we get into the juice of the matter. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Services Block Grant Fund. We so appreciate their guidance and their support. Now, without further ado, Carlita Victoria has toured nationally with Chuck Davis and the African American Dance Ensemble. She was lead singer in a promo for the television show Glee. That's big stuff. And she's been in all those plays that people have on their bucket list: The Color Purple, Dreamgirls, Hairspray, the classics. But tonight's theme is her nonprofit, Darkness Rising. It creates safe spaces and mental health resources for the Black community, a really important niche that they're filling. Or gap, probably gaping void is what they're filling. So thank you so much for being here, Carlita.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. So we'll jump right in. We always like to understand the backstory, a little more of what brought you here tonight. Tell us about yourself in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, wow, that is that's always a challenge.
Yeah,
I
it is.
am originally from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was studying dance, and I decided to make the shift into musical theater. I started performing nationally and internationally, and along that journey, I started experiencing anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Only I did not know what exactly what was going on, but I just knew something was happening. Um, I experienced some traumatic things along in my journey, and eventually it came to the point where I was in a show. I was having an amazing time performing, but I came to the point where I was having suicidal ideations and was not sure where to turn, and I didn't want to turn to anyone, so I just didn't tell anyone, and I stayed alive by just going to do the show every day. And eventually, by the time the end of the run of the show came, I decided that I wanted to reach out and that I wanted to continue living. So, in a lot of ways, I feel like the show saved my life. And then I decided that I wanted to help other people who were in my community. I took a step back to realize that the reason why I didn't want to reach out was because I had grown up feeling and thinking and being taught that it is a weakness to speak about mental health. And so I just didn't. And I decided that I wanted to help other people and enter Darkness Rising mental health nonprofit to help the Black community with resources, events, and workshops.
Right. And I can relate to that. I think I shared with you earlier that I live with depression and anxiety as well. And that feeling of it's just such a terrible reflection on me if I admit to having challenges and not even having the language, not even hearing people on a regular basis talk about emotional challenges. It's just very off-putting to reach out and try to get help. That first step is the hardest. So one thing that stands out to me is how high a level at which you were performing when you started to really struggle internally. And you said just now that getting up on stage is what kept you alive. How did that work? That dichotomy of feeling so low, but being up there in the bright lights?
It's really interesting because I think a lot of people see me and see someone who's always working really hard and trying so hard and trying to do honestly too much. But they don't see the struggle that happens behind that, and or they didn't see that until I started publicly sharing that. Um, and I think that I made myself so busy so that I could ignore what was going on in my life. And I figured if I put everything into performing, then I wouldn't have to think about being depressed. And so the process of me getting on that stage every night honestly was just, hey, well, you know what? Let's just try to make it till tomorrow. And literally every single day, I only wanted to make it until the next day. And so I would go and I would do the show. I would go home at night and I would think of ways to die. And there would be some nights where I would struggle so badly and just I wouldn't call anyone. I would just sit with it myself. I could have gone out and hung out with castmates, but I decided not to do that. I decided to sit by myself. Um, but I stayed alive because I thought, well, I'll really be letting everyone down if I don't show up for the show tomorrow. And so I honestly was like, I can't let everyone down. I have to show up for the show. So I'll show up for the show and I'll just make it till tomorrow and I'll show up for the show. And while I would be on stage, I would just feel alive and just feel energized and remember, well, this is, this is a big part of the reason why I even want to be here. And that honestly helped me keep going. But for a lot of performers, um, work is not guaranteed. It's a blessing, and so when we get it we hold on to it tight, but when we don't have it, it can be very difficult. So I was really grateful that during that time I had that to keep me going.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I that makes a lot of sense to me that there are emotions that pop up and you have to deal with if you're sitting still. But if you're running, 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 especially accomplishing something beautiful and doing a performance that I'm sure that would be a compelling reason to keep going until the burden gets too heavy. Something happened where you had to put that down. Tell us about the harder stretch of your journey.
Yes. I I believe the first night that I called someone for help, I didn't tell them exactly what was going on, but I don't know, I don't want to be too graphic, but I was at home and I was considering a few different options for the ways to die, and I had gathered them all together. And
So we might want to say trigger alert for anyone who has thoughts of suicide.
thank you. Yes, trigger alert. Um, and I stopped myself right where I started. I think a part of me was really, I was scared. It's a scary thing. And I think what made me stop um, was knowing that I would be feeling like I would be letting other people down if I did that. Not even thinking about myself or what I wanted, but just thinking about maybe what other people want. And that is part of what stopped me. And I called a friend, and I didn't tell her what happened or what was going on. I just talked to her about life stuff, and that kept me up enough to the next day. And then the process of actually deciding to reach out was, I met a dog while I was doing that show. One of my castmates had a really, really sweet dog, and I dog sat a lot with for him, for that castmate. And I thought, well, maybe I can do this if I had a little furry friend. And I started researching emotional support animals. And I decided that I wanted to try that. Yes. Decided that I wanted to try that. And then I also thought, well, I can't only get an emotional support animal. I need to also figure out what's going on with me. So I'm gonna start seeing a therapist, and I'm going to, really dig in. And then I started to reach out, and I was turned away again and again and again. And everyone told me, you're a liability. I cannot take you on as a client. And that was really hard because I thought, oh, well, I wasn't even going to reach out. I was just going to stick with this, myself. I was just going to, and because I got turned away so many times, I almost completely gave up on it. And I was honestly shocked. I was new to reaching out for help in that way, and I thought, are they even allowed to be turning me away? Why, is that legal? But they felt like there was all these liabilities. I didn't know that there are some therapists who are trained to help with people who are experiencing suicidal ideations, and there are some therapists who are not trained for that. I didn't know that, so I was just reaching out to anyone I thought who could help, and I was turned away so many times. I had insurance, so I thought this should be easy. It was not. um, but I finally found someone to help. But even along that journey, my primary care provider said, we can't help you, we can't, there's nothing that we can do. And I just felt very alone. I felt completely alone. And I'm really grateful that I made it through that process. And I just knew that I didn't want anyone else to experience that, and to experience being told no that many times, because at a certain point that can make you just stop reaching out.
Absolutely. Good grief. I'm so glad you kept going. You're absolutely right. A lot of people, you're already demoralized. That's why you're calling. So many people would have given up. Comment in the chat box. I'm so sorry you experienced that, but I'm glad you had performing to live for. And that's from Gail, our psychiatric nurse slash office assistant slash superhero. And yeah, so I'm so glad you kept going. And wow, I'm a little bit shocked to hear that. I hadn't heard that type of story before, and I've been doing this a while with NAMI, a good 7 years. I do know I have a family member who lives with an eating disorder, and she had that problem with her primary care physicians, that when the person she worked so well with moved away, she had a heck of a time having someone accept her, even though she was 2 years in remission. So yeah, that's a brutal aspect of our system that really needs to change. Um, all right, moving right along. And thank you for your candor and your courage and your vulnerability. I'm really that's a very moving story and journey. And I'm just so glad that you're willing to put it out there and help other people, because many people are going through that now. And when you were struggling, what did you find helpful or unhelpful coming from the people around you?
I often found it was really helpful to have people just be with me and not necessarily ask a lot of questions, or, hey, what can I do? What can I do? But literally just be and just say, hey, I'm here. For whatever you need or for whatever you don't need, just know that I'm here. If you just want to shoot the breeze, if you just want to just laugh about whatever today, that's what I'm here for. I had some friends when I did start reaching out for help. I had friends who would come to my apartment and just sit, and we would not even speak about anything. We weren't even watching TV, but they would just sit, and I would be in the other room napping, and they would just be there with me because I was afraid to be alone. And I think that having someone who just is okay with just being there and who doesn't need to know every detail of exactly what happened or how you got to this point, or why, how could you be depressed, things are so good in your life, and who doesn't ask all those questions. um, that was so helpful. I even had some friends who say, oh, come spend the night at my place this week, because that way you won't have to be alone, or I'll come spend the night at your place this week. Whatever it is, just hang out with some girlfriends, just for just a bit of release, I think was great, because I was already, I felt, doing so much of the heavy lifting in therapy that sometimes you just don't want to keep talking about it and you just want to break with your friends and just relax. I think that was the most helpful. I think some of the most difficult things that I experienced were some people saying some of those age old things. Well, what do you mean you're depressed? You don't look depressed to me. Or you don't have PTSD. PTSD is just for people who've been to war. That's not like a real thing. Or just, some things that you wouldn't expect people to be saying in like at this point in our lives. But some people, doubting me or saying, well, I saw you posted on Instagram today, so you must not be that depressed, or things like that you would not expect people to say to you, but you'd be surprised. But I think that's kind of what you get when you decide to. I won't say that's what you get, not in a negative way, but that's sometimes what can happen when you decide to open up and share with people. There are going to be some good and there's going to be some bad, and you know that's just life.
It is indeed. Yeah, definitely. And we, as a society, I don't think we teach people enough about mental health. Um, More and more, we're seeing mental health first aid being taught, but people are just afraid of the whole subject. And so they do what they know. And many of us were raised with stigma, you're, you need to toughen up, you need to pray more, whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fun times, right?
And that's how I grew. That's how a lot of us grew up, especially in the Black community. We grew up. I grew up just learning, not necessarily even in my family, but in my church. I grew up learning. Oh well, we can just pray it away. And I do believe in the power of prayer, but I also believe in therapy. So there's no reason why I can't go to therapy and pray if I want to do one or the other. There's no reason why I can't be in therapy, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And I will preach that to the rooftops.
Absolutely. They can be tools in your toolkit side by side. You do not need to choose. So, absolutely. So, and this kind of points to some of your comments, point to my next question about the strong Black woman stereotype. If I put myself in your shoes, I think about that stereotype that Black women are just indestructible. The other is how devastating it would be to be struggling with depression and seeing so many people, even being white, it was just extremely disturbing and disheartening to see so many people of color being killed by police. So I guess I'm asking, how did racism impact your mental health journey?
I definitely think there's been a significant impact of race on my mental health journey. I feel like there is always that strong Black woman trope or that angry Black woman trope. And so I feel like I have had to really intentionally navigate this, um, because the way that people view me is not going to always be the way that I view myself. And so, especially in terms of uh, Black people being killed by the police, and then people coming to me for my take on that, or well, how can we help, and things like that. There are, especially during the pandemic, right after George Floyd was killed, it became extremely difficult for me, and a lot of my community, just to even get up and go to work. And when you go to work, you don't want to feel like everyone's just ignoring what's happening. Um, you want to feel like, hey, we're recognizing that something huge has just happened, and that it's really impacting this particular community and everyone around us. And so I have personally experienced, either being talked to in a way that's like, well, as long as things are getting done, then that's what needs to happen, instead of, um, hey, we're empathizing with this community, and what can we do? How can we help? My job took the time to have a community gathering, which I loved and I thought was extremely important. However, yes, and they gave Black people the floor so that we could talk very candidly about our feelings. And I thought that was really important. But I have been in groups with a number of Black people who, at their jobs, um, it was just another day. The very next day at work was like, hey, hope everybody had a great day. Hope you had a great weekend. None of us had a great weekend. I've been crying all weekend. I've been crying for years. I've been seeing Black people murdered for years at the hands of the police. And now the rest of the world just noticed it. But this is not new to me at all. And so there have been days when, I've had a show the very next day, and the show, I was the only Black person in the show. And I still had to go on stage, sing, dance, kick my face, like everything was just fine. And, the day before, Trayvon Martin was murdered, and it was difficult. And so it's just it's hard to it's hard because I don't want to feel like I'm always explaining myself. And I just wish that people could understand what it is like to be in our position. But no, people can't truly understand what that's like. But I wish that people would take more time to try, I think.
Mhm.
And I'm seeing a lot more of that now
Mhm.
than I did before. Um, but I think it can be very exhausting as a Black person in this world.
Mhm.
And I feel like I answered that question in a lot of roundabout ways, but I hope that that helped.
I thought that was very clear and coherent and helpful. As you were talking, I kind of got an image of a scene from a movie. I can't even tell you what movie, but it's a bunch of criminals and there's a dead guy on the floor and they're just casually eating breakfast and there's a dead guy on the floor. And there's this absurdity that nobody acknowledges and this trauma that nobody acknowledges. Um, and another thought that came to mind, I have had a therapist who taught me the term traumatic invalidation. When you have trauma and nobody acknowledges it and nobody supports you and nobody will talk about it, it's compounding the trauma.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't always want to feel like, oh, well, let me just go talk to the Black people at work about this because at least I know they'll understand. I don't want to always feel that way. I want to feel like, you know, everyone knows what's happening. Like when I walk into the office, we all know what's happening and we all know how impactful it is. And I shouldn't have to only go and talk to my one Black friend at work about that because I know she'll definitely get it.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, the safe spaces shouldn't be so few and far between, depending on where you work, of course, but we should be able to be our whole selves at work. So thank you for that clarity. And again, for your candor. So what gives you hope?
That is a great question. My dog. Because, my therapist says to me, well, why don't you treat yourself more like you treat your dog? You are sweet to her. You genuinely care for her. You make sure that she's taken care of. You make sure she's fed. You make sure, you're nurturing to her. And why don't you treat yourself that way? So if you were to treat yourself more like you treat your dog, if you were kinder to yourself, um, how would your life be different? So she just looking at her, that gives me hope. It also gives me hope to just see the sense of community that has been created around mental health, especially as of late. I am pretty active on Twitter. I just love it. I think it's fun. It's my outlet. And I feel like I have, just because of the mental health community, I've gained more friends during this pandemic than I ever thought that I could. And I feel like my Twitter friends are my real friends. I certainly consider them real friends. And I feel like even when I'm experiencing a depressive episode, I can reach out to my Twitter friends and I know that they will understand. I know that they will be there. And I know that for some people who are maybe not as familiar with Twitter, they may wonder, well, why would someone feel that way with a stranger they never met who's on the internet? But there is this mental health community of people who just genuinely get it and get that there may be days where you can't get out of bed, but maybe you can get on Twitter and talk to your Twitter friends and feel like you're not so alone. And that is what pushes you through the day. So that gives me hope. What also gives me hope is seeing so many groups of people really fighting and standing up for marginalized communities, especially as of late. That has given me so much hope, especially during this pandemic, to see the fight that's happening and how people are really using their voices for good. Um, and it also gives me hope to see artists finding a way to perform, finding a way to be creative during this time, and finding a way to use their art for good to keep people entertained while we're at home, and people need a source of entertainment that's not talking about COVID all the time. And so that has given me a lot of hope as well.
Wherever you find people who speak your language and hear your song is a wonderful thing. If it's Twitter, if it's Facebook, if it's your neighbor, take that and hold it forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm delighted that you've mentioned your dog. I'm a huge dog person myself. As anyone who's met me for more than 10 minutes can tell you, first minute I meet someone, I'm showing them my pictures of my dog.
Like, "Oh, you want to be my dog?" Or
I know exactly.
like bring the conversation around to my dog every
Yeah,
time.
right. How can we steer it that way? And it's so interesting your therapist comment, because I realized somewhere along the line that having a pet impacts my self-talk. My inner critic falls into the background and my nurturing voice comes out because I'm taking care of another creature, another of God's children.
Yeah.
And it has a huge impact. So yeah. All right. Excellent. I'm so glad we have that in common. All right. So you have a program called Black Broadway Does Black Mental Health. I love that name. How did that come about?
Well, Darkness Rising came about right after my personal experience with making sure that I started to take care of myself and start therapy. And Darkness Rising is a 501c3 nonprofit geared towards Black mental health. And the way that Black Broadway for Black mental health came about was because we started off as a project. It was only intended to be, oh, we're going to record one song, not even an album. We're going to record one inspirational song, and we hope that this one song will give someone hope who's in need. And then we were rehearsing, and I heard all these amazing voices. I mean, I have my friends can sing. And so, of course, so I'm like, yes, all my friends come into the room. Let's sing some inspirational music. And honestly, I just needed something to keep me alive, to keep me going. And then I thought, well, let's do this for everyone. And then one song turned into 8 songs. Next thing I know, we're recording a full album of inspirational music. And everyone volunteered their time to be there, their time, their energy, all the musicians. I mean, everyone put their full heart into the music. And it ended up being something that was just absolutely life changing for me. And because it was such a beautiful experience, we decided to make that into a concert. And the people who are involved, they are Broadway singers, they're Broadway dancers. And we then decided to take that music and we decided to start making music and mental health videos where we would bring in a Black choreographer and we would then choreograph to that song. And then at the end of the video, we would have someone give their own personal testimony about a mental health experience. So make sure that other people know, hey, you're not alone in this journey. And then we also give a mental health resource in that video as well. that turns into, well, why don't I just do a whole nonprofit? Like, well, might as let's just go for it. And what kind of resources can we create here? Who can we reach out to? How can we partner with other mental health organizations? How can we partner with other uh, Black mental health providers? Who has sliding scale resources? Who has resources that are geared toward the LGBTQIA community? Who can help us provide these resources so that we can make sure we're reaching every part of our community? And boom, there goes Darkness Rising.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a wonderful process. And I love the stigma busting aspect that if I'm someone sitting at home thinking, gosh, I feel like a loser, I have a mental illness, to see these beautiful people and this beautiful talent on stage, then sharing their mental health story, that's really going to change a lot of minds. And I think that's just so encouraging on so many levels. So.
It has honestly, for me, been so inspiring to be able to see other people say, "Oh, she was in Motown. She was in Beautiful. Oh my goodness, she was incredible. Oh wait, she also lives with anxiety. She also lives with depression. I would have never known. When I see her on stage, I who would have ever known? But now that I see her speaking candidly about her experiences, now I feel like I'm not so alone. It's just been wonderful. And our name Darkness Rising comes, it's a twofold name. Darkness is in part about the color of our skin, our blackness, and it's also about the darkness that someone can feel when the world feels like it's just closing in, when the walls just start closing in on you. It's feeling I felt so many times. And then rising is just that feeling, that hope, that optimism that comes from what I found in my past experience, and then knowing that I have and am still working through a journey of there being good days and there being bad days, but finding those good days. So that's where the name Darkness Rising comes from.
Yeah, it's abstract, but it's very clear. It really brings forth a solid image of, being lifted up or lifting up against oppression, against the darkness of depression, anxiety, whatever your challenge is. So definitely a memorable name, I think. So you kind of covered music and mental health, I think, in that answer. And we've got a video coming up, virtual studio audience members. So you're going to see some highlights and a really wonderful video in just a few minutes. So tell me, Carlita, what do you say to folks who are clearly struggling, but they don't want to get mental health treatment?
To someone who does not feel ready to get mental health treatment, what I would say is, if you're not ready, even if you're not ready, to reach out to someone, to tell someone, to not just sit with it alone. So even if that means right now just saying to a friend or family member, hey, I'm struggling, so that hopefully we can get to the point where you do feel ready to reach out for, professional help. But I also say that there are so many routes to healing. So for some people may not want to go the therapy route, and there are many routes to healing. And at Darkness Rising, we don't say only the only way to do it is therapy. We say find something that works for you, but make sure that you are finding a way to healing, and that you're not just sitting with that by yourself. And make sure that you're reaching out and you continue talking about it and working through it.
And what helped you the most as you work to rebuild yourself?
What helped me the most, I think, was being public about it. And that's not something that's for everyone. Some people, and that's also fine. Some people are not ever going to speak publicly about their mental illnesses, and that is totally fine. But for me, what I found most inspiring was one day I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna say it. I told my mother, I have told my family, now I'm gonna tell the world. Um, and I wrote a blog about my journey, and I was very candid about me having anxiety and how that affects my everyday life. And I got a huge flood of DMs from other people, from friends, from strangers, from family members, like, oh, girl, me too. Me too. There are days when I cannot get out of bed. Girl, me too. And I mean, text messages, all kind. I was shocked. And I thought, well, look at this. I'm not alone. you know.
That's right. That's right.
And they said, I was not going to say anything. I was not going to reach out for help. I was just going to sit with this thing, but you inspire me to go start therapy. So I said, okay, I'll keep posting about it then. Cool. If it's helping someone go reach out for help, I'm going to continue. I'm going to post about my worst days. I'm going to post about my good days and my bad days, because that lets people know that this is real life. This is what, we're adulting, and adulting is not always fun.
It's really not. It's not. That's a beautiful thing though, too, that you're putting that out there and helping other people. And then that's building on your recovery too. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is honestly, it helps. It makes me say, well, you know what? It might be rough for me some days, but if I know that someone else was helped in this process, then you know what? That's something that I'm willing to deal with.
Absolutely. And were there any other defining moments in your recovery process or your story? Anything I missed out on here? I want to get all the goods.
Yeah. Defining moments in my recovery process, I would say, would one of them one of them was a big setback. I actually have not spoken about this publicly at all. This is the first time that I've spoken about it publicly. But last year, well, actually, it's been 2 years now. This is a trigger warning, by the way, a trigger warning for violence, for gun violence. So I'll say that if anyone needs to take a break. But 2 years ago, I was held up, and I it was a huge setback for me because I have PTSD from previous gun violence that I've witnessed in my life. Um, and that was the thing that actually initiated me starting anxiety medication. And then I personally witnessed it again and was in the face of it and feared for my life. And it was a huge setback for me, to the point that I thought I might have to shut down Darkness Rising. I might have to just, stop everything and just take care of myself. Um, but it was a defining moment because I had to spend so much, I had to do so much heavy lifting and really, really taking care of myself and taking a step back from everything else that I possibly could, so that I could do the self-care work that I had to do in order to be able to continue life. And I'm not the same. I have changed since that point. I'm fearful about things in everyday life. I have irrational fears still about that, and it's been 2 years. Um, but I call it a defining moment because although it was one of the scariest and worst moments of my life, it's also where I realized that, okay, I survived this, and now I really am going to have to do some really serious, heavy work to take care of the PTSD um, that I've been diagnosed with. And it made me just really start taking care of that part of my life. So that's why I call it a defining moment, because it really made me really invest in that part of self care.
Sure. So that pushed you to dig deeper in the recovery process you were doing anyways. Um, Not the kind of motivation anybody ever
No.
would want. Well, I'm so glad you survived that. And again, um, you're really standing out for your courage and your candor and your vulnerability. Um, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I think that's another area that people live with way too many people who feel like they can't talk about that. Um, because whenever we're victimized in any way, for a lot of us, it comes with a feeling of shame. So I'm so glad that you're able to talk about that and open that door for other people to realize, I can survive this too, and I don't have to feel that. I don't have to hold this back and have a secret forever.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Is there any particular book, movie, or song that's inspired you? You seem like you might have a list.
You know, one of my all-time favorites is a musical that has really inspired me and keeps me going, and that is Dear Evan Hansen. And it is, I don't know if any of you all have seen it, but it is a beautiful musical about a guy with anxiety and who struggles um, it just in his life with being able to speak about things that are going on with his life. And so I just saw myself there, and it was interesting to be able to see myself in a musical, even though usually when I speak in terms of seeing myself in a musical, I'm speaking in terms of like, oh, I want to see a Black woman in a musical. That's usually what I'm saying. But being able to see someone with a mental illness in a musical, I I was just, I don't know. And the music is absolutely gorgeous. I wept like a baby the whole time through. Every time I hear those songs, I weep and weep because the lyrics are just absolutely to the T how I have felt at some of the darkest moments of my life. And I think a lot of times when we want to hear a song, we want to hear an inspirational song, we want to hear a fun song, we want to hear a good song. But what about a song that's about those times where it's rough? Um, Sometimes you need music like that. And that's why I took two of those songs and I put them on the Darkness Rising soundtrack, because I said people need to hear this and people need to hear what it's like to struggle. It's not always flowers and roses. And so I wanted other people to have that experience. And that's always going to be one of my top recommendations.
It sounds wonderful. What was the name? That question in the chat box, and I had it too.
It's called Dear Evan Hansen.
So EVAN?
Yes, EVAN. Mm-hmm.
Hansen, HANSEN.
EN.
Okay. Dear Evan Hansen. Well, that's something to.
It's going to be a movie. I think they're putting it on Netflix.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, you just made my day. Wonderful. Dear Evan Hansen. So something to check out, virtual studio audience. And we are right about at the halfway point. So we're going to transition to our video of the week. First, I want to thank all of our helpers behind the scenes, our wonderful intern, Patience Gregg, psychiatric nurse Gail Pruitt on the chat box, our fabulous tech intern, Eddie Simmons, and of course, our guest, Carlita, for sharing your time and your insight and all the good things that you're doing with us. Would you like to say anything about the video before I show it?
Sure. This video is a few excerpts from a concert series that we do every year. It is called Darkness Rising Live. And in this concert, you'll see Broadway performers sharing their hearts, their energy, and their talent with the audience. And at these events, they speak about their own personal experiences, and they also sing songs of hope, inspiration, and about some of the dark times in our lives. At these events, we also have Black mental health providers there to speak directly to our community about some of the issues that are affecting us, and to we kind of do like a myths and facts game, and involve the audience. Is always super fun, and we will get back to that when the world reopens. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy the video.
Yeah, it is fabulous. I might cut us off after the performance piece of it, but I'll put the link in the chat box. So if you want to check out the end part with all the resources, you can do that. But this is a fabulous video.
all alone, all alone, all alone. Tell me what to do when you've given your all. Seems like you can't make it through. Well, you just stand when there's nothing left to do. You just stand.
The reason for this project is because one day I was in a show and I should have been very happy. Everything seemed great in my life, but I wanted to die. I was going to die. I was ready to die. I was ready to let it all go. And I couldn't have put my finger on the reason why. I just knew that something was not right, and I knew that even though I felt like dying, there was something else in there that wanted to live, and I wanted to figure out what that thing was and how to save the part of me that wanted to be alive. I was diagnosed with depression, I was diagnosed with PTSD, all these things, and I was overwhelmed, and I said, well, what am I going to do with all these things? For anyone who's struggling to get out of bed, because depression has you down so far, every day won't be like that. Keep living, keep living. Do not give up on yourself. Do not. I'm so glad that I'm still alive. Live together. Let's live together and be alive together. And it's been such a joyful thing to just be like, hey girl, found some resources, let's go do it, let's go be in therapy. Yeah girl, let's take our meds down. And I don't have to be ashamed. I don't have to be ashamed of it because it's life. And as long as I'm here and I'm fighting for my life, then I'm grateful. Sometimes you see everything you wanted, and sometimes you see everything you wish you had, and it's right there, right there, right there in front of you. And you want to believe it's true, so you make it true.
Hey. A lot of passion. What a wonderful show.
Thank you so much. We are going virtual this year, so or outdoors. We'll see what happens. But watching that again just took me back to that time and us preparing for that show and everything that all of those artists put into just giving of themselves. So thanks for letting me watch that again. It's been a long time since I watched that.
It's making a big difference to folks in our audience. I'm seeing comments about it's powerful, it's inspiration. Thank you for your commitment and thank you for living. So definitely it's touching a lot of us and it's a beautiful thing. Now we're going to go on to our questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience. If you're new to Zoom, you might want to check out the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your monitor, type in your question. It will magically appear to us and we'll answer your questions as long as they keep coming, within limits. I also want to thank the students from Omega Phi Kappa. We've been getting a lot of these NC State students, and I'm absolutely delighted to see you on the roster. So thank you for being here, and thanks for your interest in mental health. All righty, question one. Has your organization done anything to advocate for primary care professionals being trained to support individuals who may have mental health challenges?
That is a great question, and that's something that we're actually have been talking about in our board meetings, and in part and potentially partnering with a larger organization who has more resources, so that we can, because we have a strong belief that when someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, that they are reached with not the police, but with someone who has been trained to handle that. And so, particularly in Black and Brown communities, we found that uh, some of us are getting are being killed. And it's a mental health crisis. It's not, there's no reason for anyone to be killed, and it's happening because there's not enough training there. So we've reached out to a larger organization so that we can partner to create a program so that this type of training can happen, so that we can push and fight for this type of training. But we do not currently have any programming for that, but that is something that we're actively working toward. And if you have any ideas for us to continue in that fight, we are certainly open to that.
That is a great question. In terms of police interventions, that is an area of huge concern. As I mentioned earlier, well, actually I had it in my notes, I'm not sure I mentioned it. There's a Harvard study that indicated that Black folks are 3 times more likely to be killed at the hands of police. Add mental illness and the stigma, that's another group that's more likely to be killed in police interventions. So you have the overlap. So huge area of concern. NAMI is heavily involved in something called crisis intervention training, where police learn skills. It's 40 hours intensive training on how to de-escalate situations in which mental illness is a factor. And in addition to that, around the country, things are happening where social workers are being sent out in lieu of or in tandem with police officers to handle those situations differently and better. It's being dealt with, but we can always do more, so much more. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
maybe that's an area of partnership for us.
Absolutely. We would absolutely be on board for that. We want to continue in that fight in any way that we can. And we want to be able to provide resources. We want to be able to use our voices and advocate for that. Because at any point that could be me.
Hmm. That gave me pause. That actually left me speechless. Yes. Wow. Okay, I need to move on now. That's a horrible thought, but I'm so glad you're here. Next question. Do you have any sense of where your hope and wanting to live came from?
I think a lot of it came from, and this probably sounds superficial, but some of it came from wanting to perform. I like performing, and I was performing at the time that I was experiencing that, and I wanted to keep performing. And no matter how big or small, I think whatever that thing is that makes you want to live, I think dig into that thing. And so that, for me, that's what the thing was. I want to go to the show tomorrow. I want to feel like that again. I want to dance on a stage again. I want to take a bow. And so even though that it sometimes it feels self-serving as an actor to say, well, I want to take a bow, I want someone to clap for me. When you are living with a mental illness, I need someone to clap for me. I need someone to say, good job, I'm glad you're here, I'm glad you woke up today. There are people who live with um, uh, suicidality that is, consistent, and so that means that every single day they're fighting. And I feel like, even though that's not something that I live with, I do feel like I am consistently fighting for my life. In that, I have to fight and give myself affirmations to tell myself I deserve to be here. I am good enough. All of these affirmations every single day. I'm not a burden, and these are things that I'm sure a lot of us experience, but I especially, I have every single day. I wake up when I walk out in public every day, I have to, these are things that I have to do. So for me, if it's, hey, I want someone to clap for me today, and that's what I'm going to do to survive.
Absolutely. I hear that about the struggle every day. And I think you really hit it on the head when you said find your sweet spot. Maybe it's being a mother or a father, maybe it's being a teacher. With you, it's being a performer, in sort of the classic mainstream way, but also in a way that reaches out and breaks down the stigma of mental health and lifts people up in a really profound way. So, yeah, I love that. And you're getting lots of supportive comments in the chat box too about that. Okay, so please share your contact information in the chat.
Will do. When if I do that, does it go to panelists and attendees? Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to share our handles and our website, if that's okay. I'll put myself. I'll let you talk while I put myself on mute, so you won't hear me tap tap tapping.
Sure, sure thing. Yeah, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. And we do need more questions. If you have thoughts that you haven't put in the Q&A box, please bring them in. Also want to invite you to come back next week. We're interviewing 3 nurse practitioners who have an emphasis on psychiatry and mental health. Who is picking up the slack in our country? There's a dire shortage of psychiatrists in general, particularly for youth and children. So these nurse practitioners are out there on the front lines picking up the slack. Come and hear their stories. What's happening behind the scenes in our mental health system and how are people getting helped? We've also got some great authors coming up. You can find our schedule at naminc.org. It's naminc.org. And you've got our whole list of the February performances that are coming up, or programs rather. We've also got a list of our virtual support groups and classes at naminc.org. They're all free. They're all on Zoom. And obviously we know the downside of COVID. The upside is that when we have a support group or a NAMI class, you can attend whether you're in Raleigh, Asheville, Texas, it doesn't matter. You are absolutely welcome to join, and we would love to see you there. Any other questions? I actually went through my list. I don't usually get through my entire list.
It was a good list. It was a very meaty list.
Yeah, I'm not accused of keeping it light or superficial too often.
I feel like conversations like this should be about, the real stuff, because that's exactly what this is.
Yeah, and that's what NAMI is. We're the lived experience, kind of the street smarts of mental health. We're not the clinicians. We're the free classes and support groups where people will say, I've been there too.
Love that. Well, if we have a few seconds left, I would love to tell people about our free resources.
Go for it.
Awesome. So we have a program that is called Help Me Therapist.
Sorry about that.
No problem. It's called Help Me Therapist, and we just launched it with another nonprofit called Depression Black. And with this program, all you have to do is go to our website and fill out a form that says, I'm looking for a therapist of this type, and we will do the legwork for you. This is specifically to help our Black community find culturally competent therapists, because we have found that a lot of us are in want of a therapist, but may not feel comfortable speaking our lived truth with someone who may not have experienced the same thing, or understand the cultural aspect of it. So that is one of our free resources. And we also have a Black mental health provider database, a Black mental health resource packet, and a lot of other resources that are available on our website. We also do we also do a resource highlight Friday on our Instagram. Every Friday, we highlight a resource that is geared towards Black intersectional communities, and we hope that we can stay connected with you.
I would love that. And I know Executive Director Gary Kreitz would love that too. He's doing some self-care tonight. He's actually taking time off, so I applaud that.
Me
But
too. Take time.
absolutely. Yeah, but we'd love to have you back. And I'm wondering, you have a unique sort of mission or perspective because you've got the creative and the performing, and then also the mental health, the lived experience and insight, and reaching out to the Black community. Are you finding other organizations that are doing similar things? Probably not exactly the same thing.
Maybe not exactly the same thing, but we certainly reach out to a lot of other mental health organizations that are similar and um, like Beam, they are specifically for Black mental health. The Press While Black, they also do Black mental health. We haven't found another organization that is specifically for Broadway or specifically Broadway members, creating resources and combining forces with mental health providers. But we have on both sides of the creative and the mental health aspect been in partnerships with mental health platforms and performing platforms. But I do also want to say that our organization is not only for performers; it's for any and everyone who may be in need.
Wonderful. Well, that definitely will widen your pool of prospects. So, well, we've got another question popping in. We often refer to people as Black or Brown therapists from Psychology Today. The online list is for people who request someone of the same skin color, not to put you on the spot, but are all Black or Brown therapists to be recommended to our callers?
That is a great question. If I am understanding it properly, I believe that Gail is asking, um, do we are all Black and Brown therapists appropriate for Black and Brown people? If I'm understanding it correctly, what we believe is that just because you found a Black therapist doesn't mean you found the right Black therapist. So we think of therapy just like dating. I say get your options, kind of interview your therapist in your consultation and make sure it's got to be a good match on both sides. They need to feel like they're a good match for you. You need to feel like you're a good match for them, and that's not always going to be true of all Black and Brown therapists. In the Black community, we like to say all skin folk ain't kin folk. So just because I get a Black therapist, that does not mean that that Black therapist understands when I am like, hey, went to work today. There was some microaggressions. I experienced some microaggressions about my hair. My therapist may not understand, or may not even, what if my therapist says, oh, that's not a real thing, that Black people don't experience that? Then you know what? That is not the Black therapist for me. There is going to be a Black therapist for me who has also lived and experienced or understands and identifies with the types of microaggressions that can come with having Black hair at work. Um, so it is very important to know that all skin folk ain't kin folk. Get the right one for you.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. You don't want traumatic invalidation from your therapist. That is not a helpful thing. Thank you for that question, Gail.
Yes, that was
Uh,
that was a great question. 'Cause sometimes we just say, "Oh, well, I got a Black therapist. I'm good now." But you still have to do your due diligence to make sure it's a good match.
sure, it makes sense. Not everyone has the same response to a difficult environment. So, absolutely. So we've got a little bit of downtime right here, and I want to mention our NAMI walk. It's coming up in May, and that's another thing you can check out on our website. And NAMINC.org. We'll be raising money for programs like this, for our free classes and support groups, to support our affiliates around the state. All kinds of good stuff are supported with your NAMI walk. So please feel free to check that out. And maybe Patience could put a link in the chat box to our NAMI walk page if you can find it. I did not get it to you in advance, so if it doesn't turn up, there's always next week. Any other questions?
This has been a great, there have been some really, really good questions. So this has been great.
Yeah, and we usually go with the way the energy flows. If it's 60 minutes, 90 minutes, somewhere in the middle, that's perfectly fine. We don't want to make it mandatory. Any part of the show, it's all, we go with the way it feels and how it goes that way. Any other closing statements?
I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much for welcoming Darkness Rising into the space. We're certainly grateful for the communication, the connection, and just this sense of community of even just watching in the chat, people being so supportive and identifying with and understanding the journey. I think is a huge part of my personal journey of remembering that I'm not alone because I do still have panic attacks and I may have them for the rest of my life. I have no idea. I do still struggle with depression, or I still live with depression. And I still live with anxiety. I still live with PTSD. And so being able to see people, being so verbally supportive and just knowing that there are people that have my back is really encouraging. So thank you so much. I hope that we can continue to stay connected and that you all can join us in our workshops and events. Everything that we do is always free. So we hope to be able to continue the journey with you.
Well, you can absolutely count on it. NAMI North Carolina looks forward to partnering with you again. And you are a unique, clear, and beautiful voice in the mental health space, much needed. So I'm so glad that we could meet. I want to give a shout out too to Sister Trina, if she's not here with us this evening. She introduced us. She's a NAMI Wake member and a program leader, a support group leader. So she connected us, and I'm so glad.
Me too. What a light. I'm so grateful for Sister Trina. And even if she's not here tonight, she'll watch this later. So I hope you see the sister and know that we love you so much.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Sister Trina. You are a wonderful soul. Okay, so I think that's it for this evening's program. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of our conversation and part of our community. We really value you and appreciate you. Don't forget to check back with us next week. We're going to have that great conversation with the nurse practitioners. Another evening has flown by. Oh my goodness, how does that even happen? Please be well in the week ahead. Be safe, do what you need to do, go where you need to go, and take good care of yourself. All right. Well, thank you. That was lovely.
Sister's here. She says hi.
Oh my goodness, Sister Trina. Awesome. Okay, I'm so happy to see you. All right, ma'am. We'll talk to you later. And thank you again, Carlita.
Thank you so much. You all have a great night.
All right. Thanks, Judy, if you're still on. Thank you. Bye.